Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmad Jawad from DOCEO AI. Some of you know of our company, but today really we're here is basically I'd like to introduce Dr. Nadia Delanoy, and she will introduce herself more in terms of the session itself. Dr. Nadia Delanoy is an assistant professor in the Educational Leadership Policy and Governance Department and Director of Student Experience at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. And also we have another presenter, Jodie Walz, is an education technology consultant with the Rocky View districts. Her research interests include assessment practices with digital tools, assistive technology, and pedagogies to support technology use in the classrooms. Please welcome Dr. Nadia Delanoy.
Thanks, Ahmad, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm just going to share my screen here, and Jodie and I are going to go back and forth. You'll see in the chat, if you haven't already, we have a Google Doc that has some of the links and structures we're going to use today. So if you want to grab that and make a copy for yourself, that would be great. If you use that for notes, that's also wonderful as well. I'm just sharing the screen. Okay, so thank you so much for having us. Both Jodie and I have extensive experience in assessment as well as digital integration and now AI. I'll just give you a little bit of background, not to belabor it, because I know your time is really important, and thank you for taking the time to be in this session. We have worked in the in-service and pre-service space for the past 4 years together, trying to bring more awareness around digital integration and AI integration in assessment. And in a previous life, I worked at public and private districts and worked on assessment implementation at the system level in a directorial capacity. So understanding the life it lives in K-12, as well as understanding how the research sort of positions assessment and assessment implementation. Jodie, did you want to say anything more about you so that we can kind of do those introductions? She has a wealth of knowledge, but Jodie, go ahead.
No, I'm all good.
Okay, sounds good. I will toot her horn for a second. I'll just share this one story with you. We both sat on a climate change committee for K-12, and we just started chatting one day, and it turned out that we were talking about the same issues, which is that pre-service teachers and sometimes in-service teachers really have a lack of confidence in technology integration. And that's the brainchild of our series that we offer sometimes once or twice a year through the Workland School. And so today we're going to talk to you about it from a systems level, a policy level, and an implementation level. And we encourage everyone to write in the chat, make some notes, and we'll have some touch points around feedback. We'll model what we're talking about here. And we'll also give some demonstrations for you to kind of work with the material. But before we do that, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I don't do a normal land acknowledgement as in, I like to talk about what you're seeing here. So this picture is from Calgary. That's where we're situated. And really what I want you to think about when you see this picture is the idea that the roots and the plants and everything beneath the earth has historical connections for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. The connectedness allows us to acknowledge that there's some strengths and abilities for us to grow together if you think of the metaphor of the plants, the soil, the roots, so on and so forth. When I was doing my work and looking at doing these land acknowledgements, an elder said to me, land acknowledgements are okay, but it's what we do with them that is important. So I invite you to think about today where you're situated, what that means to you, how you can bring about change, and how you can get to know others' beliefs and ways of knowing along the way. And for that, as settlers of this land, we do appreciate being able to share within the stories and within the processes of understanding the importance of the land. Okay, we're going to get right into it just for time's sake. So we in our work and in implementation of assessment, some of the really big challenges are not necessarily about the technology, but about the beliefs versus the practices of professionals in the education space. This can be teachers, this can be pre-service teachers, so on and so forth. And so we want you to anchor a little bit around the following. If you're school leaders, if you're system leaders, start thinking about what is the common beliefs or the collective understanding around the beliefs about assessment. So things that include what is assessment. So part of the literature indicates that we're still in a traditional assessment frame or paradigm. That word has been overused quite a bit, but it actually is quite good at encapsulating the idea of the thought process around assessment. And much of the assessment paradigm that's traditional in nature is focused on people gathering data points to justify their evaluation of either a student or how a district is performing, so on and so forth. So we're going to say this in the broader terms. And so what we want you to think about is what are some of the notions that are being discussed and what are the differences in what we believe we think assessment is versus how it's being practiced because of systemic issues, policy implementation, the realities in the classroom, the complexities of teaching in this time, so on and so forth. Other questions we'd like you to think about at a system or school level is there agency for students within the assessment process? You know, it's interesting, we went from, and many of you who have been in K-12 for many years, I was in it for 17 years and then moved to post-secondary, but we moved from summative assessment and tests and papers and things like that to summative assessment, not so much. Let's grab onto formative assessment. That's really important. We need to engage in formative assessment so that students know where they're starting and where they need to go. And the other face of that is that teachers know how to adjust their instruction to meet the needs of students. And now the common dialogue is around assessment as, so peer feedback, student engagement, students as partners in the assessment process. So start thinking about where you're at in that conversation. And consider also, and we'll circle around this again, especially for AI, but the confidence factor of teachers, not only in assessment literacy, so how they know assessment, how do they practice it, but also how then do they transform that in a technological era. And the other piece we want you to think about is what types of assessments are being used if you're a school leader or a system leader. How is that data manifesting out? And is it varied? So can you walk around schools, be in classrooms, talk to teachers, and you're seeing portfolios being used, you're seeing exams being used. Again, we're not an all or none type of people, Jodie and I. We really do think that the truth is somewhere in the middle for assessment literacy and practice, but that they're varied nonetheless. Consider how much is formative feedback or feedback being used and how it's being used and why. Is there a mark denoted to it? Is there not? Are there teachers building capacity with each other around different types of formative so that in certain grade levels, they don't feel the pressure to give marks for things that should not be high stakes? And then also, this is a dominant conversation for technology and in general, which is there alignment and what are you doing with the data? And so considering your best intentions in your schools and your district around assessment, and then we get into styles of pedagogy or styles of teaching and learning where the assessment itself does not reflect on what has been taught in the class. And just so you know this, we're not here to judge. We're here to just talk about common practice and where the literature is. And we hope that you can take at least 3 gems away from this in your thinking as system leaders and school leaders, as well as maybe what can be revisited. We both have found that the pandemic has created an acceleration of digital use, but in the last year, since the pandemic has faded, there's been a regression back to traditional methods. And so is there a time in your district or in your schools where revisiting the assessment conversation and really figuring out what the differences between beliefs and practices lays? And the last thing we wanted to sort of highlight in this is what's the professional development continuum that's being implemented at the district level as well as at the school level, where the teachers' experiences, you know this already, the attrition rate for teachers is only going up in the first 5 years of their post-degree teaching. Is some of this about supports and conversations around assessment and digital tool use? What is the culture around assessment? And what are some of the elements that really denote good assessment practices and influences it out of the assessment continuum? So we want to make sure that people are thinking about this so that when we start talking about AI, this connects this way. So assessment, and Jodie will say this as well, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but good pedagogical practice and assessment literacy saves the day, period. It's whether or not you can understand and stretch your thought process to meaningfully integrate technology in a way that levers any of these things, whether it's feedback, whether it's student engagement, peer-to-peer engagement, making sure your data is appropriate, what you're gathering actually informs your evaluation, which is the mark or the placement that you determine in the end. And that's the phases of assessment. And so we want you to think about that as we talk about the evolution of AI. So in reality here, there is a lot of different perspectives and different types of feelings around AI in the education space, whether it's K-12 or post-secondary. The long of the short of it is, it's changing the way we understand student learning. We have never seen a ubiquitous tool of this nature that allows for students to function and do tasks in a high-level way that they may not be prepared for or may need more scaffolding than we've ever broken things down. This changes, hopefully, the way teachers perceive their assessments, and that's what this whole process is about today in the workshop, is if you can walk away understanding your teachers' perspectives and also thinking about your roles as system and school leaders, I think we've done our job. And so part of this is, if the tools are doing certain things, such as grammar checking, helping paraphrase, so on and so forth, does it mean that in every single type of assessment you need to assess language? And we're not weighing in as much as we're provoking thought processes. The other piece of this is if your students are using it to compile information and analyze the information, they've already moved from the lower edges of the cognitive Bloom's taxonomy of recall and understanding in process terms, but have they moved there in cognitive internalization terms? And so these are things that we have to grapple with. Even in post-secondary, we're grappling with it. And in some ways, we're a little bit slower at times to take it up just because of our regulations and policies. But I think in K-12, you're positioned very well to be innovative in your assessment practices. Ethical implications, we'll talk about this a little bit later, so we won't belabor that. But we will talk about the human and machine, that at any time, and this is that method of human in the loop, or that adage of human in the loop, at any time, the human needs to be using the tools more than the tool itself needs to dictate the human's choices and actions. And so we always need to model in our classes that AI is an extension. It can be something that elevates, it can be something that supports and helps, but it doesn't replace cognition. It doesn't replace social skills and soft skills, so on and so forth. And the other piece of this is we know that the pandemic has changed the landscape of motivation, of self-regulation and reflection. And I want to share a little story with you just super briefly, because I know we have to honor your time. But I'm doing a study with third-year accounting students. It will make sense to you if you bridge that into high school context. But the third-year accounting students have talked to me about the fact that they're literally conversing with the AI more than using it as a mechanical tool. And I asked them a bit about that. I said, well, what do you mean by conversing? And they say they use pleasantries, they talk in slang, they engage in that interchange. And it really pushed that thought process for me around the relational connections we have with technology now, and where the students who have grown up in digital contexts might see an ease of conversation. And yes, some of you, the flags are going off around wellness and to what extent and so on and so forth. And I will share this with you. As in the apex of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, we didn't know, and we being the people in the historical past, didn't know what the implications of learning the anatomy of a human being outside of the understanding that God and the cherubs were the only way to sort of predict the human element. We didn't know that meeting in salons in the French quarters to talk about innovations in education and sharing the truths about humanity would result in the development of higher learning in universities. We didn't know any of that, and at that time we feared it as we read the history more than anything, and I would argue we're there again. And so for us in K-12 and in education largely, we need to lightly understand, embrace, and engage so that we can keep up and support our students in the learning process. And the reason I say that is because you couple assessment with AI and technology, and it's going to be very raw because assessment is already raw for teachers. Sometimes it's hard for them to explain their intuition and why they gave certain grades, or that the calculation that was, the output in their grade book was not the actual score they gave because they knew the student was struggling, so on and so forth. So there's a reliability mechanism on that. Assessment innovation is pocketed. So that means you have some teachers and schools that are doing amazing things with assessment, portfolios, innovative technological use. And then you have very traditional, not that that's bad, but very traditional teachers and schools. And there's this like sort of juxtaposition about them. And so it's difficult at times to create that synergy or that fluency across districts and across schools. We're also going to state here that AI is not the panacea of assessment. It is a tool. It needs to be integrated because our students are using it, and we need to help teach them how to use it. And so these are things that we want you to consider, and I'm sure you've considered it already. But as we will do in this process, we're going to interject with some digestion, metacognitive or reflective activities, and this is one of them. And so we have included a Google form. It's in the Google Slides, but I don't know, Jodie, if you can grab it and put it in the chat, that would be lovely if you haven't already. She usually reads my mind. And so in the Google form, and I'm going to get over here so Jodie can share, we've asked a series of questions based on some auditing tools that are out there around assessment and AI. And so I'll just end my slides and share for a second here. And we'll just switch it up for a moment. Bear with us. While we're switching it up, if you can think about the questions that you see in the form, and it's up to you whether you fill out the form. It's really just a provocation for us to think about as we consider system level assessment implementation, as well as school level implementation and teacher capacity building. Jodie, did you want to say anything about the form, or do you want me to walk through it?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll scroll through as you talk about it.
Thanks, Jodie. You just emanated Vanna White there with your hand under your chin. But anyways, she's so much more. So we want you to think about things as how confident are your teachers in assessment, let alone assessment in a digital context? What do they think about grading? Because evaluation is one piece of the assessment system. There's so much more than just denoting a score or landing on a level. We want you to think about within the classroom, is there feedback being provided that's timely and relevant? And these are foundational assessment thoughts and principles that we need to consider regardless of the proliferation of AI, and exceptionally important because of the proliferation of AI. Hopefully that made sense to you. And then we also want you to think about the fact that AI provides opportunities for reflection. And it's a learning tool in a tutoring sense, in a self-assessment sense. So where are you at in terms of the belief systems around that? And then as a division, so this would be a little bit different, but you will have school level policies as well, or APs. But where are your policies at in regards to assessment and AI and assessment and technology? And this is one that's so significant for us. What is your culture like around assessment and technology? Culture dictates in a lot of ways the latitude that teachers feel that they have in order to practice and be innovative, take risks, and try things anew. And you know what's so sad about the technological component in education is it's been seen as an add-on for so many years. Even in curriculum, it's seen as an add-on. We have our separate curriculum for CTF and what was CTS. And we really need to integrate AI into the existing specializations and subjects that are there. And then we want you to consider in the way your teachers are integrating AI, if they are they developing future-ready students? I want to share a story with you. With the third-year accounting students I'm working with, there are all sorts of bonuses happening in industry for students who are AI literate. And when I say that, I mean, honestly, an entry level to intermediate level, not expert. They don't have to be coders or developers, but that they understand prompt engineering, that they understand what tools can be used, that they understand how to question output, so on and so forth. They understand the ethics of it. So think about that. If our goal and the ministry is saying these students need to be future ready or workforce ready, what does that actually mean? And if we're not using AI or teaching AI literacies, what is that doing for those students that may go from high school into entry-level positions into industry and work their way up, or going in from a 2-year diploma or going in from a 4-year degree? And where does that place them in their awareness? This is beyond the educational scope. This is across industries as a whole. And you know your students in your schools and your districts are destined for great things in any industry, including education. Thanks, Jodie. So we'll keep it here. Do you mind, Jodie, if we stay on this? All right. So hopefully that gives you just a snippet of what the precursor to thinking about assessment and AI and re-envisioning, because if you don't have your assessment literacy locked down, it's going to be very difficult for you to support and build capacity around assessment with technology integration. And so part of what we want to do here is to also have a common and collective understanding of what AI is in the learning landscape. And so if you look at AI, it's basically terabytes of information based on set algorithms or rules, if you will, of something that we're asking the machine to find. It pulls through the terabytes of data and sees patterns and makes predictions around what is happening in the information and through the large language models. So this can be textual, image, video, code, no code. We're seeing multimodal representations as well, where you can talk to the LLM or give it a script or prescribe the prompt, and it's going to create imagery, it's going to create visualizations, it's going to create video. And so even from 2.5 years ago to now, the vastness of improvement of the AI capacity and the large language models is beyond fathoming. And I don't think people have to be at the bleeding edge unless you're a developer, but what you do have to be comfortable with at a system level is, just like with digital tools, what's out there, what are some go-to AI chatbot LLMs that we can use, have we vetted them, and what does that look like for teacher use? Thanks, Jodie. And so this brings us to AI literacy. I spoke at a conference a weekend ago around data analytics and these types of algorithmic realities and data collection. And so I did share with them that I feel that we can't be ignorant to what AI is. It's not that type of technology. We really need to embed AI literacy into our district procedures. And this can be on the admin side, as well as on the education side, as well as in our schools. And so we're showing you two frameworks. One is EDUCAUSE, and one is from Stanford. And so we're showing you these for the most part for you to understand that there are different ways to look at AI literacy. But the bottom line is a literacy is a way to learn and understand something, whether that's assessment, whether it's AI, so on and so forth. And so when we're talking AI literacy, we're saying at the very least, students and teachers need to understand how AI works at a rudimentary level. That's why we showed you that imagery at the first slide ahead of this. And so even if they just understand what an algorithm is, how much data is there, where's the data coming from, and what are some implications, and we'll talk about algorithmic bias and things like that later, but that they need to know the technical functioning, not the inner deep workings, but the technical functioning. They then need to practically learn how to use AI. And in a lot of ways, this is prompt engineering or prompt development. And in the work I do across the university and in K-12, that prompt engineering piece is really for those that are very critical thinkers. They get to prompt engineering like that. It's intuitive. They know how to constrain. They know how to build the prompt out. And what's interesting about it is a lot of the information coming out of whether it be primary blogs or research is that the more vanilla the prompts, in some ways, the better, the less aptitude for the LLM to hallucinate. And we keep it very simple and in stages. And so we're going to show you how to do some prompt engineering as well. And then how to evaluate critically the prompt responses, or the outputs, we call them. And this is something that, you know, I find it so interesting. I used to teach IB history and IB economics, and we did source analysis all the time. And that's what evaluating the outputs really is. Is the information valid? Where is it coming from? What is the bias? And so please try to de-escalate some of the concerns that this is new news. It's not. It's just a different way and a different magnitude and scope. But the elements and the essential elements there of critical thought, of complex and cognitive flexibility, of synthesis and evaluation still make sense, because you would ask your students, if you showed them a textbook to analyze the perspective and the bias, you would ask them if they Googled something to analyze the source, the perspective, and the bias. And so again, we're talking still apples to orange, or apples to apples, just scaled out. And then ethically, this is so important, and it is not about academic integrity. It's about actually ethically understanding where the information comes from, the outputs, etc. Jodie has a lovely slide around which LLMs to use for what. So whether you're using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, why would you use them? There are reasons and differences in those types of models. And so we really need to think about what are the ethical implications around this, and we need to teach our students about those ethics. Thanks, Jodie. So speaking of ethics, we're not going to go through this whole slide, but we want to talk to you about a few things here. UNESCO came out in 2022, 2023, and 2024. They've now updated their frameworks. We have them linked in the Google Slides for you. The student framework, excuse me, as well as the teacher framework, and then a research one. And so part of this is understanding the transparency factor. And you know what's interesting is as AI evolves and generative AI evolves, transparency is becoming easier, to be honest with you. And some of the tools actually do articulate what they're doing, what algorithms they're using, and how the outputs are reasonable in nature. As a system leader, as a school leader, part of your job, as well as in the digital space, as well as AI, is always that justice and fairness for students and for those users. that no harm comes to individuals when using these tools. And on the back end, when I started going into this field and researching AI, I had no idea that companies were hiring individuals from all over the world and paying them hourly to retrain models to make sure that there's no maleficence happening. And I thought that was quite interesting because there are hackers, AI hackers, who are paid to hack AI models in order to test and make sure that they don't give negative outputs or things that will influence students and adults alike. And part of this also is your infrastructure. I'll say back in the day, but we had the Learning Technology Policy Framework, which I actually still use and explain to my students about because I think it's still valid. And part of that is, what is your infrastructure like at a systems level? What is your access points? How can students use these tools, and ones that are vetted by the system or the district level? And how are schools getting or attaining the opportunity to use those tools at an enterprise or at an individual level? And then we also wanted to talk about pedagogical appropriateness, that idea that as teachers and educators, you are experts and still learning, as we all are, in the pedagogical space. So how do we transform these tools and use them in assessment ways that are different than just traditional assessments? Because it is different. No longer should we have to move from those traditional senses of lower level blooms of recall, regurgitation, so on and so forth. Thanks, Jodie. And then pieces like students can understand at a base level what an algorithm is if you use common language, such as a statement or a rule about gathering data. They can understand bias because they live it in their lives. And so age and stage appropriateness, integrating at different levels and different subject areas, and also having a collective conversation in your schools about what ages do or should they use AI? Where is it necessary? Should it be in the continuum of learning at the beginning of the learning process, at the middle of the learning process, towards the end? Which is the best way to do it? And for us in the assessment piece, we don't really necessarily feel that we need to weigh in on that. Your strength in pedagogical practice is as important, and so is your leadership in this area. But we need a collective eye on what's happening. Can teachers plan? Do they have enough awareness of the tools? And do they understand the assessment with the integration of the technology? And so part of what we wanted to share with you is this, and we know that in the AI space, and these are two voices, it's up to you whether this resonates, but in the AI space, academic integrity became the focal point for school districts, and in post-secondary, to be honest with you. And there's two faces to academic integrity. There's the punitive, catch them, let's make sure that they're punished face of academic integrity, which many people have bought into and are now purchasing enterprise level plagiarism tools like Turnitin, et cetera. And I'll share with you now, based on my research and experience, none of those tools actually are fully capable of discerning plagiarism, to be honest with you. And then comes the risk of you all, air quotes, catching a student doing something that may not be evidence-based around it, and then there's a blurriness around that plagiarism. The other face of plagiarism and academic integrity is a collective understanding that assessment and assessment fails is a teachable moment. And this, again, is not new news. We were taught it when we went to university for teacher preparation, and it's being taught now. So some of the basic Harvard Review commentary included: openly discuss with students what they can and cannot do. Put it in your policies. Have a culture of attribution. So that means if they're using the tools, they show that, they state it, and they say how they use the tool. And typically it's based on how you design your assessment and where the access point is. So they could say they use the tool for an image creation to accentuate their text. They could say they use the tool to check their answers while they submit both their brainstorm and their checked answers in the AI output. Promote integrity. You know, I was just talking to a colleague this morning right before this session, and we were talking about an assessment project we're doing over the next 2 years across Canada. And we both landed on the idea that we don't often model, that's the global we, what integrity actually looks like. And so sometimes we will do things that students then get confused about what ethics is and what integrity is. And so we really have to concertedly show that so that they understand it from both sides of their lived experience and their taught experience or facilitation of learning. And then if they have misstepped, have a conversation. And I'll share this with you. There is a group of academics who did some research in 2023, 2024, around 200 outputs in terms of their population that they surveyed and then interviewed. And many of the reasons, and we have a slide on this, but I'll share it now. Many of the reasons students use AI is honestly because they misunderstand the assignments. They're nervous about how they can show their learning in the way that was asked. There's a lack of clarity in the rubric to the way the assignment or the lessons were taught and the assignment was explained. And maybe there's a culture of competitiveness, and I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just sharing what the research is saying. A culture of competitiveness, and mostly in high schools and in post-secondary, where they felt they had to get an edge. So they thought using AI would be the best way for them to do it. Think about that. Think about the things we've just talked about. If they misunderstand the task, if they're feeling confused and they don't feel that they can ask, if they are wondering about how the rubric weighs in, so they try to use AI to align even though they didn't learn it in that way. These are all assessment literacy components that bleed into the conversation of AI. And then really, Jodie, you can move to the next slide. We need to consider that part of the, I don't want to say fear, but part of the challenges happening with the proliferation of AI is that students are using it at a faster pace than teachers and educators started using it. And how teachers and educators are using it is different than how students are using it. So there's a misalignment, like they're almost missing each other in terms of awareness and understanding and speaking the same language. We talk about this in education all the time. Assessment needs to be a collective common language, and there's a misrepresentation there. And so the other piece of this is wondering, why do they use it? Well, they're using it for writing supports. They're using it to tutor and help themselves when they don't feel confident enough to ask in the classroom. And this isn't anyone's fault. This is a reality of complex classrooms today. But if we as educators can do anything to shift the needle or move the needle in this way to help our students feel confident, have voice, work diligently in teams, then I think we've moved a step forward. And social engagement. This is something that is still coming out in a lot of psychology and cognitive psych journals, but that social engagement piece is happening because they're feeling confidence with the technology to converse. I shared that earlier example with you. And you have to decide as trained professionals what that means to you. At the same time, we have to also be comfortable with the fact that students live in a different level of digital awareness and digital use than many of us have. And so there's a difference in it, and we have to try to empathize and understand and teach them different ways to manage, because we know that age and stage-wise, there's different abilities. We now know with neuroscience and advancements in cognitive psych that self-regulation is happening well into the 20s and 30s for males, females, and others. And so we really need to make sure that we help our students understand, as well as our educators, especially in the formative years of their career. Thanks, Jodie. So I encourage you to read this. This link should be in the slides. I use this a couple times because it's actually a really user-friendly read and it's quite honest. So some middle school and high school students were asked about AI and their use in regards to schoolwork. And this also complements the study that I shared with you with the 200 population with Chen et al. And they say things like they're using it because they're nervous. They're using it because they need help and nobody's helping them. They're using it because they need to get an edge on their outputs or their achievement. And some of them use it because they're absent, they're working, so on and so forth, even in high school. And the tricky part is when teachers ask them questions about their assignment, as well as the answers that they have used, there's a lack of ability to transfer over what they're saying to what the tools have given them for outputs. And so we have, Jodie has included some elements here around awareness, digital citizenship, so on and so forth. And we encourage you to read this article as well when you have time, we know. Throw it into AI, get it to do a synthesis, and you can read the half-page synopsis of the article. But barring anything, I think for us, we need to really put ourselves in the place of our students at times and figure out what's making them use the AI in a way that's not digitally sound and help them understand, which is the AI literacy piece. Jodie, did you want to add anything to that?
Just one thing that I will say around this is that students are using it because it's built into all the tools that they use on a regular basis. So when we consider what students are saying about it, they're using that in their personal life, in things like Snapchat and Alexa and talking to Siri and YouTube. All the things they're accessing in their personal life. So we need to bring this conversation into education and have that conversation around how students should be using this in education versus in their personal life.
Yeah, absolutely, Jodie. And I'm going to respond to Wanda's comment here and question around AI proofing. There are lots of educators who are AI proofing. And what we will do, Wanda, is we'll add some lists of AI proofing methods in our slides that once you guys click on it, it'll regenerate itself as we add the information into it. But what we'll say here is that giving opportunities for students to show their learning within a classroom context so that you ask for examples discussed in the group that day, giving them opportunities to use peer collaboration and engagement allows teachers who are walking around the room to acknowledge what is in scope and what's out of scope. I got to tell you, I struggle at times with this conversation, but giving in-class assessments so that that are non-computer based. And again, we just don't believe in all or none. So we're going to give you sometimes the middle of the road and sometimes extreme examples. But if you really feel like you need to AI proof, there are some good examples out there to do it. And we think that that's absolutely fair that you need to AI proof some of your assessments so that they're reliable and valid, to be honest with you. The other piece of AI proofing some of your assessments is having students dig into their own personal metacognition or self-reflection. Yes, AI can mimic a self-reflection, but because you all know your students and you've developed a relationship from, end of August or early September onward, you'll kind of know what is in and what may be prescribed and then have a conversation overall. It also gives a great opportunity to teach reflection as part of the assessment process. And it's not, I think I lived in this era where the teachers are like, write a 2-sentence reflection. And it was constant. And even in your education programs. And it became so inauthentic to reflect that it became procedural and not deep learning. And so that's that sort of balance we all have to strike, and you know your students better than any of us on how you design those opportunities for them to show what they're learning in real time without computers. Perhaps it's practice in taking an output and then revamping it in class time and making it their own. And we'll show you a framework that I'm sure many have seen momentarily here. I hope that helps, Wanda, but we'll add some things. I wanted to talk about this because I think it's so important. And Jodie and I, in our series, we discussed some of this as well. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding around cognitive load and AI. There are many different ways in which students can engage, and it works within their cognitive load. So that means their ability to process, synthesize, and not feel overwhelmed or anxious within the learning sequence. And so part of that is how teachers design the assessment, and we used to call it blueprinting, and Jodie and I still do a session on blueprinting, but maybe that's old school language, who knows? But we believe that we need to blueprint our assessments so that we actually know which outcomes we're using that are skill-based, that are knowledge-based, so on and so forth. And then for those of you, this will bring you back. But when you look at a student's ability to learn, most teachers know where they're capped out. So that zone of cognitive ability. And so designing those tasks where there's little spots where they can elevate and challenge, but not too many. And the reason why, and we're seeing this across the board, and I don't know if anyone wants to share in the chat, but students are more fragile than they ever have been. It may be the pandemic, it could be many things, but they're lacking resilience. They're lacking the ability to fail forward in a lot of ways. I know that sounds cliche, but it's actually a nice visual representation of failing. And there's a difficulty then for teachers to work within that context. So we want you to think about that cognitive load aspect of it. And when using AI, is it helping them with their understanding and learning processes, or is it adding more of a challenge? Is the tool too complicated? Is the output outside of the range of what they would be thinking about? And the other piece of this is foundational knowledge is always important. Sometimes that means no AI whatsoever. And we have to be confident that it's the right tool or the right process for the right job. And that means it's not all or none. That means you need to be able to teach foundational knowledge. Maybe it's a mini lesson, maybe it's a slide deck, maybe it's a lecture, and that's okay, so that when they use the tools, you know at the base level what has been taught and what they should be transferring. All right, so I'm going to turn it to Jodie to talk a little bit. This is just a slide for you for user purposes to look at the different frameworks, and then we'll move on. We did add the ASPA slide there because they are working on policy guidance, and maybe that's in your wheelhouse. However, we really do like the UNESCO frameworks for student learning and teacher engagement and design, and so we've offered it there for a resource. So we're going to also give you a resource on readiness. And so it's a bit of an audit for you. It's American-based, so you guys decide how you feel about that in these very contentious times. However, it's a good resource, just so you know that. We have it there on a QR code. It's also in the slides. It's a way for you all at a systems level and a school level to have a conversation about where you're at in terms of readiness. And we've also created a Mentimeter that will allow us to have you think about the different ways in which you can consider readiness. So I'll just share with Jodie. And you have multiple ways to get into the Mentimeter. There's the QR code that is in the slide deck, as well as, Jodie, do you want to share the link? And this is process, by the way. So these are those interjections of high content and what you need to think about. So we want you to sort of answer the idea of, does the use of generative AI align with what you're achieving, so your mission, goals, and values in your district? So these are things like, if you're not understanding the statement, it's things like, we believe in innovative thought. We believe in creativity. We believe that students need to be positive consumers. We know that students need to be a part of the conversation around assessment. If it's not there, it's not, oh my gosh, you know, what are you doing? It's really about, does it fit? And in your system level conversations, why or why not? And in those ways, consider how can you adjust policies, revision, have conversations and build it into your ed plans as to how to do this. And I would recommend the following. Don't just say AI. And I think that's where people are making mistakes right now. Use it in context with assessment. Use it in context with technology integration. Use it in context with cognition, so cognitive learning. What tools can we use to elevate creation? What tools can we use to allow for evaluation? And that will change the discussion so that we're not hearing all the time AI, 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 but we're hearing educationally sound practice with the infusion of AI as part of the tools that we can use to support students and build out AI literacy. That's the bottom line. I'm going to move on to the next one. Is your district or school's assessment literacy strong enough to engage with AI? And so we know that you can build a plane, like it's that whole adage of you're building it as it's flying. We get all of that. At the same time, we really do feel that assessment literacy, so that is the notions, the abilities, the awareness, and the common language around assessment needs to be foundational before we even talk about different tools, because that collective responsibility and notion about assessment needs to be there. And so again, just an opportunity for you to think about where you're at and what then are the next parts of the conversation. Do you have a team? Do you have people who, and this is such a hard topic. We love early adopters, and Jodie and I are arguably early adopters, but we're also early adopters that can put ourselves in the position of others. So you'll see we're using common language throughout this presentation because we don't want to get you mired in jargon. That's not the point. And so these people or team or point person needs to have the domain experience and awareness of AI, but they also have to have the skills to work with people, to engage in a critical change process that's as raw as it is uncomfortable, as it is enlightening, as it is exciting. And so think about who those people are in that adoption sequence. And then do you have a strategy? We're going to go through a couple of frameworks that can frame your strategy, but even though it sounds businessy, it really is important that you have an eye on what and how you're going to implement and in a sequence of implementation. We know this through many years of educational planning, that after you look at your 2 to 3 years of your goals that you've set, there are markers and metrics around if you've succeeded. 3 years is never a good turnaround. It's always a 4 to 5 or even 7 year for change management. But if you don't have those strategies and a technological framework to guide it, we're going to lose our way. We're going to have pockets of inspiration and pockets of fear and everything else. And so being aware of it, making it transparent is really important. And the other pieces we talked about, a policy that helps students know when to use it, where to use it, why to use it, teachers to know how to use it, why to use it, what does it look like? Is there a transparency there? And there's time. This technology is evolving, but if you can get ahead of it to start brainstorming what this looks like for you, and your policy framework does not have to be 10, 15 pages long. It can even be a infographic of things, so you can have a framework versus a policy. The framework is guiding principles around practice. Many districts are going that route. It looks like in the tone, the ministry is uncomfortable with certainly weighing in on a fulsome policy. Don't wait for that. Take it by the horns a little bit yourselves. You're very capable. You've done this before in other change apexes. Start thinking about what students and teachers need to know based on AI literacy and start mapping it out for yourself, from the simplest elements of understanding how AI works to the more robust elements of what is the ethics and integrity around it and how do we deal with that in a code of conduct method. Just so you know, the ASBA and the UNESCO policies give you some of that. You don't have to make it from scratch. So we highly recommend that in your team or your point person that you give them that task to read those frameworks and then just pull pieces to start developing your own. All right, Jodie, I'm going to turn it to you. We're putting a lot into this this webinar, you guys. Hopefully you're finding some gems in it.
So in terms of possible use and consideration for educators, educators are using AI to support themselves in the classroom, whether they're doing that to engage students in learning, the types of learning they're using, and even the administrative tasks that they're used to. So when ed tech people are talking about AI, they're talking about the importance of that privacy and security. So how are we engaging with those AI tools? What does that look like? We're not putting in student names. We're not putting in identifiers. Districts are really focusing on privacy and security for both teachers and students, and including that what that infrastructure looks like to support both of those. So on the teacher side, we really want to focus on student digital literacy and citizenship and building those skills and knowledge for future and career-ready students. Now, the particular type of AI tools that I have listed on these are all free. So our top one is Goblin Tools and Brisk Teaching. These Goblin Tools is its own website. Brisk Teaching is kind of an add-on that is extremely powerful, and especially when we're talking about feedback. So the way classrooms are built right now and the time teachers have to spend providing feedback, and especially in that assessment phase, it can be time consuming. I have heard so many teachers talk about how easy it is to use Brisk to provide that timely feedback. You know, as an ELA teacher, you would have 30 papers to read. Well, you could put some things into Brisk to get that general feedback, and within one day, that feedback is provided back to schools or back to students. So we also have Canva and Magic School. So Canva for Education, again, is that powerful tool that teachers can use to be creating, to be providing resources to their students, but also to be having students in their Canva classrooms and allow students to be using some of those AI tools in a safe and secure way. Again, Magic School AI is a lot like that Brisk. There are so many different tools within Magic School, and it is currently free. So all of those powerful tools teachers can use. Nadia, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk about the digital divide?
I think we can keep going. I'm just responding to Therese in the chat. And so just so you guys know, we did slate for an hour and a half. If people need to leave, Ahmad is recording this, but we're going to keep moving so that you have a robust understanding of our deliverable of Re-Envisioning Assessment. Sorry, Jodie. All right. So part of what's happening in school districts is they're looking to different frameworks to understand how to then talk about this, how to help teachers build capacity, and how to help in terms of wrapping their heads around the capabilities of AI. And so this scale is brand new in terms of it's been adjusted from its earlier ideation from 2022, and it's been iterated twice now. And so these are levels that you can consider. So when is it important to not use AI? When is it important for AI planning? How can you use it as a collaborative tool? What is important about engaging with AI in its full capacity, and then using it in terms of enhancing or elevating problem solving, developing insights, drawing on analysis, so on and so forth. And so we've given this to you to chew on. If you haven't already thought about it, it is not the only one out there. We've heard that there's a lot of good frameworks coming out of BC and other areas, but this is tested, it is research informed, And so we thought giving you this to start thinking about how to have the conversation with teachers. And you know what would be great? It would be great to do an audit around this. So multi-grade groups of teachers talking about what assessments do they use, where they're integrating it for collaboration, where they're integrating it for some elevation of learning, and where they're not using it at all. And so just building that collective understanding for us is so important to the AI literacy piece. Jodie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and one of the things is this provides a great opportunity to include those students in that AI literacy. So I use this framework within my online comm class, and just involving students in the conversation around proper AI use, proper citation of AI, really moved their thinking along and how they were using it. When you have to provide the prompt to the teacher or provide the chat to the teacher, it really makes you stop and think about how you're using it, because you're submitting that to your teacher. They're going to see it. But it also produces that critical thinking within students.
Thanks, Jodie, for sure. Yep.
And I'm just going to keep on talking. So I know Wanda earlier asked about AI proofing some of the assignments, and a lot of that is super valuable. And that AI proofing has really been talked a lot, especially in the humanities. And we're going to kind of talk about that. But I want to consider, like we just talked about, bringing our students into that conversation and having those conversations about appropriate use of AI. When should you be using AI? When should you not be using AI? Providing certain assignments that you say, you know what, there's no AI as a part of this assignment. Or, you know what, this is a great assignment where you can be brainstorming. What does it look like to use AI as a brainstorming tool? We know students are using it, so we want to guide them within our classes about how they're using it within our class. Now, the first example here, I'm going to jump around a little bit. These links are in that link slideshow provided to you. So this is an example of a Bio 20, and lots of teachers say, oh, I'm science or math, I don't have to worry about AI yet. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. So the first example I wanted to try in terms of assessment practice was Bio 20. Now, this is a very basic assignment that can easily be thrown into AI and the different AI tools, including different free tools, to almost completely do this assignment. So as a student, if I wasn't super engaged in this particular, I wasn't really interested in biochemical cycles within biology, I might just take this entire thing and throw it into AI. Now, for fun, I actually threw it into all the AIs to see who would produce the better one. And Google Gemini actually produced the best output that I felt like, oh, I could almost copy and paste this in, and probably, depending on the rubric, get full marks. So that's, again, that conversation. I can also add the rubric to AI, and it can even do a better job of producing that assignment. So as a teacher, I might think about overhauling this assignment. And I might not necessarily AI proof it, because maybe I want them to brainstorm some different pieces. I would specifically say that. But I definitely would feel the need to change this assignment. And my first thing I would do is I would put this as a teacher into AI and say, how can I modify this assignment to make it less AI user friendly, so to speak? And it gives you tons of great examples. And Nadia and Wanda both talked about those. So adding a log or a journal to focus on the process. a lot of times when we're creating assessment, we are so focused on that end product that we've forgotten about that triangulation and that observation and conversation and the power it has to lead to that end product, but the process that students got to this final project. So adding that journal, you know what? You have to journal, you have to create a log about what you're doing. And sure, you know what? AI can probably do that, but there are so many contextual pieces to that that are so specific to your classroom that sometimes those can be really easy to spot when they're AI created. The other piece that I will say about this is local context. Again, I'm going to talk about context over and over and over again because it's so important, but local context. How can I tie this to my context of my high school and my community and the environment that I live in? So if I put this assignment in Fort McMurray versus Airdrie versus Lethbridge and all in between, my local environment is really going to change what that biochemical cycle looks like. And you'll see within here at the bottom, they talk about environmental issues. Well, again, that is a great opportunity to invite in context and specifically community-based issues. So AI is really good at providing the answers to this. It's not good at bringing in your context and your community and your environment. So again, really easy ways to, I wouldn't say AI proof, because with the movement of AI and how fast it's changing and the available tools, I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully AI proof our assessment, but by bringing in those little pieces around community, context, journaling and logging, we can really focus on different areas. And again, we can focus on process. So that is our first existing. And as a teacher, I would say, how can I make this assessment AI? And I would overhaul this particular science one. And again, I'm completely adjusting it and having that conversation within my classroom. I'm going to jump over next to the humanities example. And again, this is a choice board. So already we are providing voice and choice to students. You'll notice in the last one that this particular one says you will be assigned one of the biochemical cycles. Again, I would instantly overhaul that to provide voice and choice to students. When they aren't connected to their assessment, they don't see their why, they don't see the purpose. That opportunity to perhaps use AI to just complete the assessment even goes up. We also talk about that idea of plagiarism, cheating, that academic integrity, and kind of that catch them culture. When students have a voice and they are connected with a purpose and a why to assessment and how it affects them, they are much less likely to feel the need to use tools to complete an assignment. Again, these are ongoing conversations that are always happening around assessment. None of this is new. It's just the idea that now there is something else students can be using, and how is that going to look within the classroom? And time. Teachers, I'll talk about that in just a second. So with this particular choice board is focused on the novel study To Kill a Mockingbird, and we are re-envisioning assessment to reevaluate what is important to assess. So like Nadia said, spell check, grammar check, that is readily available in all of the tools that we're using. So we don't need to assess those things. So really, what are we focusing on, and what do we need? Now, through the engagement of choice of this particular assignment, we kind of assume that with choice, students are going to pick based on their strengths. So that's building those relationships and getting to know the students that I have in my class. How can we incorporate those strengths into my choice board? Now, the example of write a journal entry, again, easy to bring in context. If we're reading the novel in class, if we're having class discussions, if we're watching certain portions of the movie tied to the chapter, all of those are naturally built into journal entries and naturally bringing in that specific context of the classroom. Now, there's tons of different, I actually, when Nadia and I were going through this and I was like, draw a scene from a novel, I might actually, I definitely have kids, students who are artistic and can draw, but I actually might have them use an AI image generation to see what they can come up with. What was their prompt that they prompted to get the image to represent the novel? Again, we are not saying never use this, because we know students are using it. We know students are using it. So we want to guide how they're using it in education. And from these two different assessments, you can see that the traditional assessments tend to need more overhauling than our project-based, our choice boards, where the assessments we see student voice. And we can tend to argue that by providing that choice, there's an opportunity to change our assessments. And I will say this is not going to happen immediately. We can't expect all of our teachers to change all of their assessments overnight. And when we're working with teachers, we're setting small goals. Okay, what project, what exam, what assessment do you think needs to be changed immediately, and perhaps changing it? Or even looking at an assessment in a specific unit and changing that one assessment in that one unit. This is getting the ball rolling for bigger change over time. And as system leaders, a lot of you are in system leaders within your school divisions. What can you put in place to assist teachers with this change? So one of the other pieces, now this is a little bit different. So I know it's all lumped together within this, but this is just something that I wanted to show because I think the power that AI has for a lot of students can be used and harnessed right within the digital tools that we're using every day. So this is a Math 10C Systems of Equations check-in. So it is not being evaluated, it is not being graded, we are not reporting on it. I spent my Math 10C talking about a specific unit in systems of equations, and I want to check in with my students at the end of the class. So I'm just going to go through this because I want to get right to what I'm doing. So my check-in is that my students say, you know what, I am good to go. I have a green light on systems of equations. And you know what, I understand this. Now, within our Google Chrome, we have Google Lens. And all I have to do is highlight this, and it goes through the steps I have to take for math. Now, yes, this is a check-in and I want to see what my student knows. At the same time, the significant proportion of students who struggle with math anxiety, and I have 2 out of my 3 daughters who are completely stressed out at math and seem to, no matter how hard I try, say, oh, I'm just not good at math. I'm not a math person, which anyway, that's a whole other topic. But I have shown them this tool because it gives them the confidence to try something. And yes, students have this available and teachers will argue, but I don't want them to use this. But I just want to say that this offers such a support for so many students, even in translation, all kinds of different pieces for our English language learners. The Google Lens and the idea of taking a picture of something and translating it or getting step-by-step instructions for it really offers a tool of support for so many of our different learners.
Thanks, Jodie. So we're briefly going to talk about, we asked you the question about, do you have a strategy? And so we're going to share 3 different, we're not going to go through them in detail. You have them in your slide deck, but we're going to talk about 3 different frameworks that you could use to implement AI in your district, as well as digital practices. One is the TPAC framework, and we'll show that to you momentarily. The other is the SAMR model, which was taken up quite a lot in the East, to be honest with you. And it looks at how technology can be integrated in different ways. And then we're going to look at the TEACH framework very quickly. So if we can move to the TPAC, Jodie, visually, I think this helps people understand how to change lead in the TPAC frame. So don't make these circles or the triple Venn be overwhelming. We're just saying the following. As you're integrating AI, teachers in building capacity, whether grade specific or cross grade, need to be comfortable with having conversations about what is the content they're teaching, how does that link in the program of studies of the curriculum, what are the levers they're going to use, i.e. pedagogy, to teach and also help student learning with said content, and how can technology be folded in order to see how the whole interchange or relationship between technology, pedagogy, and content can overlay. So strategy-wise, what that says is at a systems level and at a school level, we need to have deep conversations around designing, augmenting, and re-envisioning our assessment with AI so that we can know what content is there, what AI can be done. So pull the framework to Know AI, Elevating AI, brainstorming and ideating with AI, and then start looking at the context. Is the context where these students are guided in an inquiry way? Is this context where there's a lot of traditional learning? And again, not good or bad, just is. And then start thinking about where you can integrate the technology and why. So the framework around assessment integration with AI, and these frameworks can couple together, help develop a strategy and help us move along. And so if you look at the SAMR model, Jodie, if you wouldn't mind moving the screen, we also can look at different ways in which, and this is from the university, we're taking this on a little bit more, but how can technology, and you can see the terms here, be used and how different tools can be used. So what is the substitution rate or the equation? How can you use it to augment different parts of learning? So a tutor, a translator, different tools. How can you use it to modify different types of learning? So using experiential learning methods such as case studies, having them analyze, having them work with the AI persona so that the AI persona is an expert and they're talking to them and engaging in different types of inquiry that you couldn't do if you weren't in a community where you could bring in experts in a face-to-face context and redefinition. And then we'll move on to the next one. Again, there are many technological integration frameworks that you can fold into your strategy, but these are ways you can take a look at how to integrate AI in a way that's pedagogically sound. The TEACH framework, which is Stanford oriented, looks at the ideas that technology needs to be responsive to the needs of students. You need to know which tools, what tools, and why. And then also that it motivates their learning. And because we know that students are using AI, and sometimes for personal use, but also times for user approaches in classrooms and assessments and tasks, then we know that there is a give there in terms of the engagement piece. And our role is to help regulate and integrate. This series could be, or this could be a series, there's so many pieces to it, but also looking at accessibility and honestly, the last one, which is so important, that the ideas of where students are at and the process learning is so important to the ways in which you can leverage the tool. Thanks, Jodie. So I just wanted to share this around the literature that's coming out around AI usage. Because of prompt generation, because of prompt engineering, because of the cognitive processes they're using to think through using AI and different tools and imagery and constraining prompts to develop different types of pictures, different types of methods to show their learning. What they're saying in the literature and the research is that AI is combining different types of cognitive competencies, such as reflective thinking or metacognition. It's combining and folding in critical thinking and problem solving because they actually have to learn how to constrain the prompts and make the outputs better and better and better. So that's deductive reasoning, that's in taking insights and synthesizing, evaluating it. And then when you're looking at things like Jodie showed you about the computational thinking, this has been the case in Alberta in mathematics and in mathematical representation. We're just not there at times. And so perhaps using an AI tutor or using Google Lens or other things can elevate the abilities for students to see the steps. And I just want to share this with you because I think it's so important. Students don't have to get it right away. Learning sequence and cognition dictates that they can use mimicry first to show understanding, and mimicry or mimicking turns into internalization and embodying the learning and understanding, which then if you give them opportunities to analyze and evaluate, moves them into the continuum or the taxonomies, if you will. I won't use a specific one, but moves them into different, deeper levels of thinking and learning. And so consider that as we look at developing strategies and thinking about the benefits of AI. We're not saying all the time, we're not saying to replace foundational learning, nothing like that. It is part of the sequence of technology integration. And then Jodie, if you just want to move on to the next slide, I'll briefly touch on this for time. If you take a look at this slide, it's really about metacognition and understanding what they know. So I wrote in the chat there as a preemptive note for all of you that we have lost that idea that we need to help students understand what they know, why they know it, and how that feels for them. And so this whole metacognition and application is really ripe right now in both the teaching and learning sciences space. And so arguably some of this is about embedding opportunities for them while they're using tools to develop their knowing of abilities, their knowing of their feelings. And this directly links to self-regulation. If they understand themselves, if they understand their frustration points and their anxiety, they're better able to integrate with you as teachers, as guides, and system leaders as guides and principals, VPs, etc. They're better able to talk about, engage, and work through it. And all of this is in the sequence of learning. It's not a separate track of affective or behavioral methodology. Thanks, Jodie. And so we have this in here, but we're 5 minutes before the end of this. So maybe what we'll do is just share the following. Prompt engineering, which is how we use different tools, has evolved significantly over the time. When I work with my research classes, and I do applied research in general, we look at different components that have to be in the prompt in general. So we look at what is the task you want the LLM to do? What is the role you want it to play? What is the context? And because most LLMs like Claude, I use that a lot. Jodie talked about different other ways to use different types of chatbots, but really giving it that opportunity to have context. So that could be uploading a PDF, giving it specific context, giving examples to it. This is, if you can imagine, this is all learning to script. And learning to script means creating a story in your mind, creating a sequence to it, understanding who your audience is, what you need to get out of it, and how you need to draw parameters or scope in the learning. And then if you want to move to the next slide, Jodie, one of the things that we use here are color coding mechanisms to understand different ways to prompt using the task, role, details, context, examples, and audience. And that's a very simple way to prompt engineer and understand how to work with and talk with an LLM. We have another example here which uses warnings as an addition to this. And Jodie, because we have 3 minutes left, do you want to briefly talk about how we do this sequence for teaching and learning?
Well, I'll just, I know we're running out of time, so I will just say that this is a really great template that we have provided to our pre-service teachers, and you can provide to your teachers to make this specific for what they need. So when teachers very first start that prompting and are struggling getting what they need, this is a great tool for them to use where they put in the context and the specifics that they need, but it would meet the need to get what they want out of the AI.
Thanks, Jodie. And so as we round the end of this, Jodie had put in here, and I think it's poignant for you to understand which LLMs are used for what. We won't belabor it, but we just wanted to give you those tools. And we'll just move on here. Just to say, and this is such rich conversation, we've added some tools and books and things that you can use for helping you along the way. I think this is why Jodie and I are committed to this, because we're looking at it from a theory and a practice lens. And Jodie, if you wouldn't mind just moving to that slide there. It is up to you if you feel like it. We just want you to think about and give you that metacognitive stop point or pause at any point if there's something that really resonated, something that you're still wondering about, and something that you're going to try based on our webinar that Ahmad has graciously given us the time to do. Please do put it in the chat. If not, put it in your brain vault and start thinking about different ways in which you can digest this information and start talking as teams. And with that, we will just end with our last slide, which is our thank you and any questions. So lots of information, lots to digest, but honestly, it's a wonderful place to be. You can kill many birds with the stones that we've talked about here, which is strategy, collective understanding of assessment literacy, building teams, working with capacity with teachers, leveraging your early adopters, and developing a common language. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Nadia, and thank you, Jodie, for a great presentation. And just reminding everyone that I'll send you an email with the link for the video, and also share it with everybody from within your school districts too, that they might be interested. And Nadia, you're going to share basically the presentation itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've given a link and then we'll add to it so that
Okay.
people in real time can see some of the questions they've asked for resources.
Excellent. And this is a great webinar, and we're going to have more to come, and we'll update you on some of the future webinars that we will have on AI in education. Thank you, everyone.